Salia's breathing calmed down in the shadow of dawn, and the morning fog was as thin as a layer of thin wavy, covering the silhouette of the village on the border of the human world. In the old thatched hut, the faint fire was still crackling like a murmur. He lay on the grass, his limbs gradually dismantled from the deep dream. The golden light quietly burst out from behind the eyes, like a hidden spark, indicating that an unknown force was about to appear. The moment he opened his eyes, the world around him seemed to be slightly shaking. The strange golden light overflowed from the pupils and shone on the rough walls, making the rustling sound of the wind blowing across the leaves sounded particularly lonely. Salia blinked, her fingers unconsciously holding the edge of the grass trunk, and the burning pain shone through the sea of brains. He sat up, rubbed his son's hole, and breathed rapidly in the air, accompanied by the low roar of wolf out of the village, as if a group of beasts in the distance were mocking his fragility. The floor squeaked protests, and he stood up, his pace as unstable as a wounded wilderness. The window was right in front of it, and the broken wooden frame was covered with cracks. Outside was a frozen field. The cold wind dripped in from the gap, bringing a biting chill. Salia leaned over, pressing her palm against the cold glass, catching the scene outside. Suddenly, everything changed. His eyes were illuminated, and a low buzz rose like an illusion, pulling him into another world. The flames swallowed the temple, and the high-pitched stone pillars collapsed in the turbulent turbulence, screaming like a tide. Salia saw himself, holding a flash-like weapon, standing in the center of chaos, the Asgard ruins shattered in front of his eyes. He felt the heat coming towards him, and the skin was burning, and he couldn't move. When he came back to his senses, he bumped into the wooden table in the room and slammed into the small space. Sweat slipped off from the base and moistened his clothes. He gasped, his chest undulating, and the sudden burst inside him stormed like an undercurrent, only turning into a shaking finger. Grasping the rag bag around her, Salia hurriedly put on a rough leather jacket, and the fabric rubbed against the skin, giving the touch of roughness. The door opened in the creaking sound, and he pulled out of the hut, and his footsteps were rumbling on the village street, as fast as a drum. The cry of the urchin far away spread out in the air, suggesting the darkness. He did not stop, and he only felt the wild rhythm of his heartbeat while running. The forest is right in front of it, and the branches are swaying lightly in the wind. He hid into the tree, stepped on the dead branches, and made a crisp cracking sound. The cold wind became stronger, wrapped in the smell of soil and moss. Salia leaned against an ancient tree, and the roughness of the skin rubbed against his back, making the real coolness clear in an instant. A vague black shadow flashed far away, and the deep murmur followed like a ghost, like the breath of a chasing man. He stopped gasping, his shoulders moved slightly, his palms pressed his eyes tightly, and the bursting golden light cast sporadic fragments of prophecy, and the shadow of the power of the ancient god was dancing around the field. It's not a blessing, but a curse," Salia murmured softly, his voice carrying a stinging voice, as if he was talking to the wind. "I saw the end of the world, but I can't change it. I can't wait anymore. I want to find out the truth and prove that I'm not a pawn of fate." The thunder sound around him was strong, like a storm in his heart. He straightened up and his heart ignited like a flame. The shadow moved again, and he felt the danger approaching and did not retreat. As he ran, the rustling sound of the leaves accompanied his pace. The world seemed to be expanding and retracting, leaving a blurred blank space, allowing thoughts to fly in the gap. Salia disappeared into the mist deep in the forest, and her back gradually merged into the shadow. The shadow that came from the tail of the group appeared far away, indicating that a chase was about to open. In the wind, the low voices were still lingering, and his heart was settled in the thunder, and for the vague hope, he embarked on an unknown journey. Salia's steps crushed the frost leaves on the icy forest, and the sound of the hidden drums hitting the silence around him. The mist surrounds his body like a living creature, and golden light overflows from his eyes, illuminating the thorns in front of him. His chest was undulating, and the cold wind dripped in from his clothes, bringing a biting coldness. Behind him, the group of dark shadows gradually took shape, and a group of dark warriors in broken cloaks appeared in the mist. Their armor reflected a gray and cold reflection in the faint light, and each step was accompanied by a metal tinger, like the hum of an ancient chain. he endured the pain and bit his teeth and moved forward. The curse I released the image again, and a burning wave of heat rose from his eyes, causing his body to sway slightly. The tree shadow twisted in the field. He foresaw a fatal trap, so he hurriedly turned around to avoid the sag hidden under the snow. The low buzzing sound was like a ghostly whisper, whirling around the ears, engaging in the sharp chirping of the turtle. Salia did not stop, his pace was like wild movements, and the crispness of stepping on the pine tree leaves accompanied by his breath reminded the danger that it was nowhere to be there. The chasers approached, and they danced with enchanted weapons, and their energy buzzed and dissipated like a murmur. The leader's voice came from the front of the team, cold and heartless, "You are the root of the prophecy. Salia, the punishment from the ruins of Asgard will swallow you." As the voice fell, a flying axe broke through the air, and a golden light burst out in Salia's pupils. He caught the trench and quickly rolled over to an ancient pine tree. The axe was embedded in a tree and made a deep slam, and the wood chips scattered like snowflakes. He leaned against the skin, felt the rough texture in his palm, and his heartbeat was as rapid as a war drum. There was a rush in my heart, and the dead eyes were no longer just burdens, but weapons. "Why do you think your dead eyes bring only pain every time?" He murmured, his voice dissipated in the wind and turned into a determination. "I can't escape anymore. I'll use it to protect myself this time." Concentrating, Salia calmed down the golden light, and the image became clearer. He foresaw the next step of the chaser, lit his eyes and glanced at their strife, and suddenly rushed out of his hiding place. The chaos exploded in the forest. The dark warrior's weapons were planed over the air, and the metal scratched the sound of sharpness. Salia's shoulders shook slightly to avoid the close attack. His fingers held the dagger tightly around his waist, and the old object became a counterattack blade. He entered a hidden ruin of the village, and the smell of burnt wood was filled with the air, and the wailings of villagers were everywhere, like broken echoes. The chaser caught a villager, who was tied up and his clothes torn apart in the cold wind. The hero's consciousness was like a flame, and Salia rushed forward. The curse captured the enemy's weakness, and the golden light flashed in his pupils. He saw the contact of the armor, and the dagger rolled out an arc and stabbed at the fragile point. The sharp sound of metal scratched sharply, accompanied by the heavy breath of the chasing killer falling down. The villagers fell to the ground, their eyes wide open, full of shock and gratitude. "Stranger, thank you for saving me." He trembled and exhaled, and the sound of the leaves swaying in the wind, "But those black shadows come from the fallen north, they will never stop, you must leave." Salia pulled the villagers up and pushed him into a safe corner without saying much. Time waited for no one, and the roar of the chaser rose again, and he turned around and continued to run. The frozen open space opened in front of him, and he slipped, an unbalanced body landed heavily, the snow squeaked, and the dampness and coldness penetrated into his clothes. At that moment, his fingertips accidentally touched a piece of ancient world tree leaf. The thing moved like a living thing, and a warm rhythm came from the palm of your hand, and the low voice sounded like a heartbeat, and it was light and soft. He held it tightly, and the world seemed to be quiet for a moment. The texture on the branches is like an ancient rune, shaking slightly between the fingers, and the low words continue, "Child, I have witnessed the fall of the old god. You hold the key to break the rebirth, don't succumb to the shackles of fate and go to the ruins to find the truth." As Salia's breath subsided, the golden light in his eyes subsided. He felt a force flowing from the branches into his body, dissipating a little chill, calming the storm in his heart. The chasing killer's footsteps were rumbling far away, and their spells reverberated in the wind like a ghost, but in the chaos, they seemed to be confused by the eye of Salia's curse. The energy of the buzzer gradually weakened, and Salia used the guidance of the branches and leaves to hide behind the rocks. Time seemed to be stretched out, and he heard their voices far away, leaving only the whisper of wind. He straightened up, held the leaf, and felt a new determination in his heart. "I won't be a pawn anymore, I'm going to rewrite this curse." He murmured, his voice as if he was a vow, "Tell me more, branch, I'll face them." The lowly words responded, shattered and mysterious, providing more traces, the secrets of the old god's fall, and the fragile gaps of fate. Salia's eyes became clear, and he looked north, in the direction of the Asgard ruins, and the wheels there seemed to be hidden in the mist. The cold wind swelled up a snow fog, and the world seemed to expand and contract at this moment, leaving a blank space, allowing his thoughts to fly invisibly. The movement on the branches was weak. He knew that this was just the beginning of the journey, and a deeper confrontation was about to begin. Salia held the branches of the world, stood up from the shadow of a rock, stomped on the snow, making a shattering sound. He looked north, and the silhouette of the Asgard ruins appeared in the mist. The cold wind rolled over his face like a blade, bringing a biting chill. He pulled his clothes and continued to move forward. The branches slightly swayed in the palm of their hands, like a humorous response, guiding him through the valley. In the sky, the light of the lights emanated from the front, illuminating a hidden ancient grotto. The entrance to the settlement was like a huge opening, swallowing up the darkness around it. He stepped into the narrow stone door, stumbled on the rough stone floor, and the heavy echoes were like the ancient cries. The dwarves stopped working at their hands, and the sound of the iron knocking came to an abrupt end, leaving only the explosion of the fire and storm. The air was filled with the burnt smell of metal and the heat of heat. A group of dwarves turned over, their eyes flashing under the fire, filled with warnings. Salia raises branches and leaves, making it sway lightly, and the rustling sound is as soft as a rain. He took a deep breath and felt the cursed eyes on his chest slightly irritated, which was suppressed by the warmth of the branches. An old dwarf stood up next to the melting furnace, wearing burning armor, and the flames jumped on his face, reflecting the pattern like a carved rune. His fingers rubbed the rough iron, and the harsh sound of metal rubbing broke the silence. The dwarf's low words were flooded like a tide, filled with suspicious whispers and stern breathing. Salia took a step forward, his voice steadily and sturdy, with exhausted rest. "I am not here to fight, but to break the life shackles brought by the eye of the curse. I long to be a part of my destiny to fight this dark tide with you." The dwarf craftsman narrowed his eyes and controlled the tight iron with his rough hands. He looked at Salia, his eyes swept through the flashing golden pupils like a searchlight. "Why should I trust you from the outside?" His words were like a slam, hard and direct. "The prophecy said you will bring disaster, but your eyes revealed the inner righteousness, or maybe we can share the defense line to fight those shadows who are tying their lives." Before the sound of the words came, a low roar came from outside the settlement, accompanied by the sound of dragging chains. The invaders of the dark gods rushed in like shadows, and their steps stomped on the snow, bringing a chill of coldness. Salia's curse I activated instantly, and a low buzz-bang caught his ears. He glanced at the enemy's trunk, and a golden light burst out in his pupils. The dwarf craftsman responded quickly, grabbed a tool from the melting pot, and acted as a young warrior. "They are here," he growled, his voice drowning in the sudden chaos. The battle exploded in the grottos. Salia dances the world's branches and leaves, fighting against the first invader. The branches collided with dark weapons, making sharp metallic strikes. The burst of energy was like thunder, and the air was filled with the breath of burnt rocks and the roar of flames. The dwarf craftsman operated the melting furnace and threw out a group of fireballs. The fire illuminated his face and reflected the decisive line. Salia's movements became more and more confident. Every time he avoided, he felt that the curse was no longer a burden, but a guided sword. The invaders came up, their weapons released dark energy, and Shin's growl was like the breath of a poisonous snake. Salia's shoulders swayed slightly, avoiding a blow, and the branch line drew an arc in his hand, hitting the enemy's armor. The flames intersect with the shadows, and the heat waves of the melting furnace come to the surface, dissipating a little coldness. The dwarf craftsman pushed him out and released a new craftsman weapon. The weapon flashed with the light of the ancient god, and a faint movement came from the handle, like the beating of the heart. Salia took it and touched his fingertips, and the power rushed in like a tide, strengthening the eye of the curse. His pupils burst into light, and a loud echo resonated in the cave. He held the artifact tightly and turned around to attack. The dark energy ripples buzzed and a weapon was drawn towards his chest. He avoided his body and at the same time he fought back. The sound of metal hitting was filled with heavy breathing as the enemy fell. The dwarf craftsman was behind the support, and the iron hit another invader, and the fireball exploded, illuminating the dead bodies. The rhythm of the battle was like a wild drum, and Salia's breathing gradually became smooth. He felt a team of tacit understanding, taking root and sprouting in the chaos. Finally, the invaders were pulled back, and their roars went away, leaving only the rest of the burning breath and the metallic balance. Salia stood among the dead body, holding a magic weapon, and her chest was undulating. The dwarves' cries, the thunderous applause and the iron-knocking rhythm were filled with the warmth of the first trust. The dwarf craftsman patted his shoulder, his rough palms carrying heat. "This magic weapon is possessed by my clan, and it contains the power of the ancient gods," he said, with a little softer voice. "Take it, but remember, your choice will determine whether it becomes a salvation or a deeper curse. I doubt that the prophecy, it may be manipulated by whom." Salia points its head, holds the weapon tightly, and feels its movements resonate with the curse eye. "These dark gods are just outposts. I have seen the images of their leader. He controls the energy of the ancient gods and intends to devour the 9 realms." His words were as firm as a vow. "We must unite, otherwise everything will repeat the tragedy of the dusk." "Thank you, the craftsman, this cooperation allows me to see the value of the team's strength. I will use this weapon to prove that I am not a pawn of fate, but a variable." The night was deeper, and Salia stood on the cliff where he settled, holding a magical artifact to the direction of the northern Asgard ruins. The cold wind squirted up the snow fog, the curse eyes were unstable, and the ropes that could predict the energy of the ancient gods. A low roar from afar, like a hidden warning. The world calmed down at this moment, leaving an invisible blank space, allowing his determination to extend in the wind. The lights of the settlement flash behind you, like a new alliance, illuminating the unknown path ahead. Salia turned away from the cliff, facing the warm lights of the settlement, and stepped into the north with Grim. The dwarf craftsman's steps were steady, and the iron in his hand swayed on his shoulders, making a low collision sound. The night was like a thick curtain covering this deserted land. Their breath turned into white fog and quickly dissipated in the cold wind. The frozen mountain road stretched under their feet, and each step broke the ice-clad stone, bursting out a crisp echo of Titicaca. Foam was slid from the valley. With a knife-like sting, Salia pulled his cloak, feeling the magic weapon shaking slightly in his palm. The curse eye glowed slightly deeper into the eyes, like a hidden lamp, guiding them towards the silhouette of the Asgard ruins. Far, the spire of the ruins seemed to be hidden, like a sleeping giant, guarding the secrets that had lasted for a long time. When they arrived at the entrance of the ruins, the sky was as dark as ink. Salia lifted up magical weapons, allowing it to emit a faint light and illuminate the door of the rock. The low roar came from deep, like the whisper of an ancient god, stirring up a slight shock. Grim stepped forward and pushed the door hard, and the harsh sound of creaking flashed in the empty corridor, as if awakening the memory of Wu Zhang. They stepped into it, and the air was filled with the smell of Chenfu's stone head, and the cold touch spread from the stone wall, directly through the bone marrow. The corridor is narrow and winding, and the collapsed stone pillars are in the road. They carefully avoid it and act like old friends. Grim snatched the iron and hit a suspected hidden machine. The sound of metal hitting jingle was rumbling between the stone wall. Salia's curse eyes suddenly lit up, and a premonition of stinging pain climbed up his spine. He stopped, reached out to touch the stone wall engraved with runes. As soon as his fingertips touched, the runes burst into light, and a magical wave rolled over like a shaped wave. They couldn't help but step back a few steps. Grim lit a torch, and the flames crackled in the darkness, casting a swaying warm light. In that light, they saw the hidden Odin thing. A guard talisman was exposed from the stone mask. Grim dug his waist and rubbed his fingers against its surface. The guard talisman emitted a low sound like an echo of a heartbeat. Salia closed her eyes, and the curse eye was strongly activated, and a humble stinging sensation penetrated the brain. The illusion came like a tide. He saw himself standing among the flames and collapsed ruins. The sound of a violent explosion suddenly erupted, and the structure of the divine realm collapsed like broken glass. He suddenly opened his eyes, his chest was undulating, and the sweat quickly cooled in the cold wind, handing the talisman to Grim. Grim, this ruin is filled with the memories of my parents, the thunder of Sor and the wisdom of Freya. Salia's voice trembled slightly, with a determined determination hidden. I long to be possessed, but this curse always reminds me that I am a prisoner of fate, and I must break this rebirth for justice and rebirth. Grim took the talisman and his eyes lit up under the fire. Salia, you are not a lonely exile, we dwarves are never afraid of darkness. I will fight with you and protect this Odinite, which may change the proposition of death and allow us to rewrite the order of the divine realm together. Salia points, but no response immediately. They moved along the corridor like a sound hole, and their footsteps amplified in the narrow space, each step closer to each other's emotional connection. Suddenly, a wave of dark creatures emerged from the shadows, and their low roars were like the breath of a venomous snake, filling the primitive thirst. The Salia dances the magic weapon, the blade cuts through the air and the enemy's roars into a chaotic exchange. Grim continued to fight back, and the iron hit the nearest creature, and the shaking sound of the rock hit the rock returned to the fourth field. The battle was like a violent storm, and Salia's side avoided a claw, feeling the dark energy rubbed over his sleeves. He slammed his backhand and the magic weapon drew an arc line, cutting off the enemy's advance. Grim's slap hit another creature, and the flames burst out from the weapon, illuminating their breathing faces. The enemy gradually retreated, and they stood back to back, their chests undulating, and their breathing fluttered in silence. Salia knelt in front of the old god's throne and touched the broken statue. The low voices are emitted from the statue, like the whisper of an ancient god, with a gentle and invisible pressure. He raised his head and said to Grim, "The blood of the Father is calling me, and the wisdom of the Mother guides me. If my saints can bring a new order, then I am willing to bear this resurrection, so that the 9 realms will not repeat the overturn." Grim held the talisman and let it shine in his palm. Looking at this talisman, it contains the power of the ancient gods. We have to act carefully. This is not just a weapon, but a key to our destiny. Salia, let us move forward for your inner desire and our common goal. They stood up, their voices blew from the ruins high. The curse of Salia faded, leading him into a remote illusion, where the dark shadow danced in the thin fog, like a blind war dance, and the goddess-like silhouette appeared. The voice sings on the horizon with a fascinating rhythm, turning it all into the new alliance's stage. In the night, their shadows stretched out and merged into the darkness, leaving a quiet blank space, allowing the flame of determination to prolong the heart. Salia and Grim stood in the corridor of the Asgardian ruins, with their backs against the cold stone walls. The sound of the silence like a ghostly whisper was gradually replaced by the roaring sound from afar. They held the Odin talisman tightly in their hands, and the surface of the talisman was slightly swaying, like a hidden twitch, reflecting their alert eyes. The curse of Salia flashed in the darkness, and the purple light spread like thin silk, which would indicate that the chaos would soon swallow this ruin. From the depths of the corridor, a low roar rolled around, accompanied by the friction of the metal armor, approaching like a tide. Grim's eyes narrowed, and he glanced quickly at Salia, his eyes filled with unspeakable tacit understanding. Their breathing became rapid, and Salia felt the curse beating deep in the eyes, and a premature stinging sensation climbed along the spine. He raised his talisman and murmured quietly. The talisman immediately emitted a protective light, like a transparent barrier, striking the first batch of dark god warriors. The warriors held long spears of thorns, roaring like thunder, and their armor reflected a cold light in the faint light. Grim shouted, dancing with his battle axe. The axe blade shattered through the air and made a heavy slash. The first enemy came, and his side flashed, and the axe hit hard, hitting the sound of sparks. Salia took a step back, closed her eyes and focused. The curse burst out with dazzling purple light, and the high-frequency buzzing sound was rumbling in the corridor, like an invisible wave. The light made him see the enemies twitch slightly, and he did not retreat, stretched out his finger and slapped it lightly. A small group of dark warriors suddenly turned towards each other and collided with each other. Their long spears stabbed at their companions, and accompanied by the brittle choking and the shattering of metal, they scattered in the narrow space. The battle was like a violent storm. Grim and Salia stood back to back. Grim's battle axe danced out a series of arcs, and each blow brought heavy knocks and enemy mourning. He glanced at Salia's face twisting in the purple light, and sweat slid down the magnitude, hiding a new sense of determination. Salia took a deep breath, and the curse locked the enemy's weakness. He urged the magic weapon, and a wave of energy surged out from his fingertips, killing the warriors. The gravel collapsed from the stone walls, and the particles danced in the air, bringing a slight scent of earth, mixed with the burning smell of flames burning far away. At the climax of the war, Salia suddenly stopped, and the curse looked directly at the phantom of the leader of the Dark Clan. The illusion takes shape like a smoke, accompanied by the echo of low words and roars, and the first voice crawls in the air. "Silly godhead, your mistake will only bring greater destruction. What I pursue is not power, but the flame of revenge that will swallow you all." Salia's chest was up and down, and he held the tight talisman, and his voice turned to a certainty. "Your revenge will turn into ashes. I will use this curse to prove that fate is not a prison, but a chapter we rewrite." Grim took the opportunity to step forward and recreate several enemies. His axe hit the stone, causing a shocking echo. He shouted loudly, "Salia, you are not a lonely warrior. Our lance will break the darkness. I swear to use my axe to guard your path for the lost righteousness." The words were like a warm current, and Salia felt a force rushing in his body. Their movements were inconsistent. Grim attacked the lower wing, and Salia used the curse to guide energy. The purple light flashed in the corridor, accompanied by the low sound of movement, which led the enemy one by one. The battle gradually subsided, and the enemy retreated, leaving only the echoes of the dead and the surplus. The voice calmed down, and Salia and Grim were panting against the stone wall. Their clothes were torn, covered in dust and blood. Grim wiped the sweat from the magnitude and his eyes fell warmly on Salia. "Salia, this thread, the tree leaves of the world point to the position of the goddess of war. We must move forward. This is the beginning of our brother's contract." Salia pointed at the head, his curse eyes subsided, leaving only the rhythm of heartbeat reverberating in his chest. He picked up the fragments on the ground, a piece of green flickered in his palm, and the faint light was like a flame of hope. They looked at the trophy, and the branches of the trees of the world emitted a faint fragrance, as if they were coming from the ancient forest. Salia raised his head and looked at the corridor. The concealed silhouette in the shadow reminded him of the previous illusion. He didn't say much, but put the fragments away, and Grim patted his shoulder. The action was simple and tacit. They turned away, stumbled in the ruins, and Salia's curse flashed again, indicating that a new journey was about to begin. In the night, their shadows stretched out and melted into the endless darkness, leaving only a mysterious green light that swayed slightly in the wind. Salia stood up, and the curse flashed like a silkworm in the night. He patted Grim on the shoulder. The action was filled with fatigue and strength. Grim responded with a head, carrying the baggage of the world's branches and leaves, and the fabric on his shoulder rubbed a slight rustling sound. They walked along the gravel road in the ruins, and each step was swept in the empty corridor, as if echoes were chasing their shadows. Far away, the stormy low roar was like a hidden wilderness, and the biting cold wind came into the cracks, bringing a damp musty smell, which made Salia unable to help but tighten her clothes. They crossed the dark arch. Grim's breath became deeper, and he raised a torch, and the flames jumped on the stone wall like living things. In the environment, the ticking sound of water drops falling is as rhythmic as their heartbeats, and with their feet, the gravel slides down and produces a light tick. The leader of Salia, the curse swayed slightly, and he felt a premonition spreading in his chest, like an undercurrent. He pulled out the enchanted sword, and the blade slid out of the sheath, and the scraping sound blew in the air, breaking the silence around him. Grim followed behind, and the battle axe gently knocked on his palm, and the action revealed a sense of vigilance. In front, a hidden underground temple is in a concealed shape, with green light like light swaying on the stone walls, emitting a faint fragrance of the forest. Suddenly, a rapid sound of war came from the darkness, like a far-reaching call. Salia's curse eyes lit up, and he stopped his steps, his hand shaking slightly trembled. Grim lights another torch, and the flames illuminate the interior of the temple, revealing a blurred figure. She sat alone on the stone fort, with a light blue light on her body, and the chains swayed lightly, making a sound of the lens. The blind eye of the goddess of war dance was flashing with the predicted light, and her whispering sounds swept over her like a slight wind, accompanied by the rhythm of water droplets around her. Salia took a step forward and reached out, and the action was slow and cautious. The goddess of war dance felt his existence and stood up slowly. Her soul chain rubbed against the stone, giving off an icy touch. In the background, the rumble and shock sound of the Nine Realms cracks began to increase, like the roar of the underground. Grim held the axe and stood on the side of Salia. He said in a low voice, "We are not alone, Salia, this crisis requires you to lead us forward." The words were like a warm current. Salia's shoulders relaxed slightly, and he responded, and the curse eyes locked the shadows around him. The power of chaos surged like a tide, and the dark energy exploded from the crack, accompanied by the sharp tear sound and the burst of flames. The rotten smell spreads, like scorched soil in Chen's metal. The Salia teamed up with the goddess of war, and the three of them formed a defensive shape. Every step she took was as elegant as a dance, and with the slightest swaying of the wind, she swayed the soul chain, and the sound of the chains blew the air. Grim danced his axe, and when the axe slashed the dark body, it made a heavy thrust sound, bringing a shock every time. Salia used the eye of the curse to see the enemy's action. He avoided a wave of dark energy attacks, and the buzzing sound of the energy shield was rumbling around his ears. He protected the goddess of war dance and let her attack with a chain, and the ice-cold metal was plodding in the air, bringing a stinging premature. During the battle, Salia shouted an order, "Grim, guard the left wing." His voice penetrated the noise, and the background was filled with metal bumps and cracks. The goddess of war turned around and swept out like a whip. She said, "Your eyes carry fate, but I see a change. The energy of the ancient god can regain order, but it needs to be paid." Grim shouted, and the axe smashed a dark body and sparked. He gasped, sweat slid down the magnitude. "Salia, hold on, we can seal it." Salia felt a fragility in her heart, like a hidden crack. He reached out to touch the arm of the goddess of war, and the action was filled with swaying, and the sound of his heartbeat drowned out the flames around him. He said, "I always see the future of destruction, and I long for a person. Can you understand?" The goddess of war dance pointed slightly, her blind eye flashing, "Join you, I will use my battle dance to challenge the destined shackles." The battle reaches its climax, and dark energy comes like a wave. In the interaction between Salia and the goddess of war, he revealed more of his heart. "If this is an opportunity to break the rebirth, I am willing to bear the risk and protect these 9 realms together." They worked together to seal the cracks. Salia's curse eyes burst out with light, and the flash sound of energy bursting back, and the waves swept over like a storm. Grim took the last wave of attacks, and his axe landed heavily, bringing a sound. The crisis was resolved at a certain time, and the three of them stood in front of the sealed 9 realms rift. The curse eye of Salia flashed with new light, like a awakening flame. In the night, green light turns into a deep red color, and an indescribable sound blows, bringing echoes from the distance. They gasped, their shoulders leaned slightly together, and Grim patted Salia on the back. "We did it." The goddess of war stood quietly, her chains swaying lightly, like an unfinished melody. In the shadow, unknown challenges are waiting like ghosts. Salia stood in front of the 9 realms rift, and the curse eye moved slightly in the deep red night, like a burrow that had not yet been extinguished. The three of them were still gasping, their shoulders leaning against each other, and the tired sweat was cold on their skin, bringing a sticky touch. The sound of the far side was like a roaring wilderness, rolling up the surrounding fogs, making the air in the sanctuary even more depressing. Grim's battle axe hung on his body, and the axe blade reflected the ominous red light. The goddess of war dance was silent. Her soul chain swayed lightly, and a slight echo of the mirror. Suddenly, Salia clenched his fist and the curse eyes burst out with a purple light. The light shone like cracked frost, accompanied by a low echo of prophecy, roared between the stone wall. He felt a feeling of turning, like a ripples hidden deep in his chest, gradually spreading and spreading. He turned to Grimm and the goddess of war, and the deep red light reflected their tired silhouettes. Salia's hand slid towards the magic weapon on his waist. The surface of the enchanted longsword shook slightly, and a faint buzz came out, like the whisper of ancient power. He gritted his teeth and a conflict in his heart surged like a tide, forcing him to make a decision. Grimm raised his eyebrows and stood up from the stone floor. His heavy boots knocked on the ground, making a heavy echo, shaking the air around him. He pulled his waist and picked up an old sheepskin paper, rubbing between his fingers, rustling like dry fallen leaves dancing in the wind. Grimm tried to sarcastically, but showed differences in his words. "Salia, are you crazy?" His voice was rough, with the dwarf's unique determination, and he couldn't hide his anxiety. His fingers held the paper hard, and the knuckle bones turned slightly white. The goddess of war danced listened to the tranquility around her, and her dress moved lightly in the slightest wind, like the whisper of a river in the distance. She tapped the ground with her cane, and the crisp metal ramming sound blew in the temple, breaking the pressure silence. Her blind eyes flashed slightly, revealing the hidden threads in the fragments of the prophecy. "Salia, your determination shocked me," she said. Her voice swept over the leaf like a slight wind, carrying a deep loyalty, "but I can't see the future, I can only feel it. This pronouncement suggests that your survivor will awaken the ancient god, and we need more time." Her cane stopped on the stone, and the action was like a heartbeat, filling the air with the power of waiting. The differences within the team expanded like a crack, and Salia was heading towards the edge of the crack in the 9 realms. The voice became wild, and the sound was like a roaring wild beast, rolling up the dust around it and stinging their skin. He raised his magic weapon and the blade burst out like a spark. The light illuminated his face and reflected his determination. Grimm and the goddess of war got forward at the same time and grabbed his arm. Their steps roared in the temple, like a rapid rhythm, showing the tension and deepening of their relationship. Grimm's palms were rough and warm, holding Salia's shoulders tightly. The chains of the goddess of the war dance swung lightly, giving an icy touch. Salia intersected the prologue to the goddess of war, her fingers slid over the paper, and the slight friction sound spread like ears. She held the paper tightly, as if it was a fragile key. The 3 of them surrounded them, and Grimm checked the magic weapon, and the sound of the chains erupted in the air. The breath of the temple is mixed with the smell of Chinfu and power, making people feel a heavy pressure when they breathe. Their breathing sounds rise and fall, like the chords of the heartbeat, intersecting in silence. "I foresee the turnover," Salia said, his voice low and firm, and the curse eyes locked at the teammates. "We can't be restrained by fate anymore. I'm willing to sacrifice everything to break the rebirth. This is my right and my destiny." Grimm slammed his head, his eyes narrowed, and he was flickering. "Salia, are you crazy? This magic weapon is not a toy, it will destroy you." He strode forward, knocking his palm with a war axe, making a low thrust sound. "We are allies. I can't let you destroy yourself for the overall situation. I long to protect you, but this decision is too dangerous." His words fell to the ground like a stone, carrying an inactive weight. The goddess of war dance was lightly looking at her head, and her cane drew an arc on the ground. "Salia, your determination shocked me, but I can't see the future, I can only feel it," she said quietly, with a silkworm in her voice. "This prophecy suggests that your feud will awaken the ancient god, but we need more time. The loyalty I pursue cannot be allowed to be self-supported." Her figure swayed slightly in the deep red light, like an ancient tree swaying in the wind. Salia took a deep breath, her chest undulating like waves. "I understand your grief," he said, his spirit is softened, without losing his determination. "But if I don't challenge, I will always be a piece of prophecy. This is my inner goal, and in order to regain the order of the divine realm, I must move forward, even if it means a sacred." Grimm was silent for a moment, then let out a heavy breath. "Well, if you persist, we will face it together," he said, patting Salia on the back, the action with habitual strength. "But I will protect you. Not only is it the responsibility of my allies, but also my way of survival." The goddess of war dance turned around and locked her neck and moved lightly. "Let us deepen this loyalty," she said, her voice as gentle whirlwinds. "I will guide you with my war dance, but remember that your sacrifice may be a turn, but we will all face the consequences." Finally, Salia made a decision. He retracted the magic weapon back to his waist, and the crisp sound of the metal sliding into the sheath sounded like a sentence. The team began to move and walk towards the exit of the Temple of Saint. The far-round voice gradually weakened, leaving only a single sound wandering in the air. Their pace is gradually stable, with a premonition of potential challenges. Salia turned away from the cracks and turned against his teammates, and the curse eyes were unstable. In the deep red light, a crack-like golden light quietly appeared, like the dawn on the far horizon, suggesting the awakening of the power of the ancient god. In the shadow, unknown animals are waiting like a ghost, waiting for them to step into the next chapter. Salia stepped out from the shadow of the temple, stepped on the rough stone, and burst out a heavy wave. The deep red light still surrounds the old bulb, like an undispersed footsteps, accompanied by a low growl of voice, pushing them towards the entrance of the Nine Realms cracks. Grim and the goddess of war goddess were nervous, and their breathing was still with the fatigue of the past, and had gathered into a speechless determination. The roaring sounds along the crack came in a confusing manner, like the low words of the wild beasts in the far side, reminding the dark gods of the approaching. Salia took a deep breath, and the air in his chest was carrying a cold sting. He led the team forward, and the magic weapon in his hand moved slightly, as if responding to the about to explode. They passed through the ancient arches, and the surface of the stone was covered with a long-term pattern. Winds rolled into the cracks and rolled up a shattered fog. Salia's vision swept around, his eyes locked on the hidden power of existence. The dwarfs held their shields tightly, and the sound of the iron-matched lenses spread out in the air, like a rapid battle song. Exiled gods appeared in the shadows, and their eyes were filled with mixed fear and determination. Salia lifted up the magic weapon and overhead, and the blade reflected sparks of light under the deep red light. He shouted, and the sound tore the silence around him, bringing these scattered warriors into a solid warrior. "Stand up," he said, speaking as if it were rocks. "We are not here to survive, we are here to rewrite our fate." The battle came like a tide, and the main troops of the dark gods emerged from the cracks. Their roars were like the roar of wild animals, shaking the ground. The Salia was at the forefront, and the blade danced out a series of arcs, each of which was accompanied by the buzz of the magic shield, pushing the enemy's attack like a shaped wave. His curse eye began to flash, and a purple light spread around it, transforming into a foreseeable crack, blurring the real border. Grim was guarding his wings on the side, and he danced with axe, which slashed the enemy's defense, and the sound of tearing accompanied by a wet and mixed movement. The bloody smell spread out, pungent and familiar, making the war scene more chaotic. The goddess of war danced turned like a whirlwind, and her weapons were striking in the air, resolving the threats from all directions. Her light dance steps slid across the stone, each step was like writing an invisible melody, the light chain sounds intertwined with the enemy's roars into a wild conversation. Salia glanced at her figure, a warm current surged in her chest, and was soon under the pressure of the fight. He paused for a moment, and the curse eye reached its peak, and the energy in the eyeball burst out with a low buzz, shaking the air around him. Allies felt the invisible pressure wave, some stumbled back, some held the weapon, and a flash of sparks flashed in their eyes. At the center of the war, Salia recycles the ancient god energy he felt earlier. His fingers slid over the runes of the magic weapon, and the ancient patterns began to glow, accompanied by the whispers of spells, wandering in the wind like lowly waves. A flash of light burst sounded, and the air around it seemed to be distorted, bringing an icy chill. Grim grabbed Salia's arm, his palms were rough and warm, and his strength was so strong that it almost made people breathless. "Don't be strong," Grim growled, his battle axe dripping blood, "let's carry it together." The goddess of war covered them with her dance steps. She turned around, her weapon broke through the air, and forced the nearest enemy to retreat. The three formed a tight circle of defense, their breathing was erratic, and the rapid rhythm of their heartbeats reeled in their ears, like a hidden rhythm, strengthening their New York belts into invisible armor. Salia looked straight into the eyes of his teammates, and at that moment, time seemed to be relaxed. We can't escape anymore, he said, sound piercing the noise of the war. This battle is not for me, but for rebuilding the order of the 9 realms. I am willing to use my life to break the rebirth of this curse and become your shield. Grimm's eyebrows were tightly locked, and he slammed his eyes. No, Salia, you are our hope, not our sacrifice. He strode forward, and his axe hit the ground, making a heavy thrust sound. If we lose you, everything will return to darkness. I can't watch you walk on that road, which will destroy us all. His words fell like a stone, carrying an unavoidable weight. The goddess of war dance stopped her dance steps, and her chains hang down lightly, giving off a slight glimpse. She turned to Salia, her blind eyes slightly flashed. Your determination makes me see the true leader, she said, voice sweeping over. Our dance will coexist with you, but I feel hesitant because your fetus may awaken the deeper confusion. We must move forward with caution. Salia felt the heat flowing in his chest, and he held the magic weapon tightening, and the light on the blade became even more intense. Grimm, goddess of war, you are my family, he responded, with soft determination in his language. The shackles of his prophecy are broken by me, even if it means my end. Our New York bell will become the cornerstone of the new order. The battle reached its climax, and Salia selflessly led the wielding. He released a wave of energy, accompanied by the explosion of thunder and the roar of flames. The dark gods were repelled, and their roars went away, leaving behind a messy battle. The flames licked in the air, bringing a burning breath, which also lit up the shadows around them. Grimm and the goddess of war are guarding him, and their movements are inextricably linked, like an extension of a body. The last illusion of Salia's curse eye flashed, and a cracked image dissipated in front of his eyes, and he knew that time was approaching. Finally, Salia knelt on the ground, and the sound of her knee hitting the stone surface was like a low sentence. His curse eye closed and the energy in his eyeball retreated like a ripple. The cracks around began to shake, and a faint energy light rose from the ground, suggesting the awakening of the power of the ancient god. The voice was weak, and only a sound was left lingering in the air. Grimm approached the goddess of war, their eyes were filled with gratitude and admiration. The noise of the war gradually faded away, leaving only the potential danger, like a group of undispersed shadows, waiting for the next dawn. Salia knelt on the gravel of the war scene, his chest fluctuated, and every breath seemed like a wire pulled out of the deep penis. His curse eye moved slightly, even though it had closed, it seemed to be still responding to the hidden low buzz. Far away, the sound of gravel sliding down from the edges of the 9 realms cracks was like an echo of a scene, wandering in the air. Grimm and the goddess of war stood beside him, their shadows stretched over the bloody ground, forming a quiet picture. The long robe of the goddess of war is floating lightly, and the delicate sounds of the fabric rubbing into the wind create a tight silence that makes people feel the force that is about to explode. He took a deep breath and pressed his palm against his chest, and the movement there was reverberating like thunder. The curse eye emitted a faint light again, and the purple light flashed behind the eye. Salia stood up, his body stiff and firm, and the energy of the 9 realms cracks in the background accelerated like a heartbeat. The thunderous sound of the bird came from far away, accompanied by the echo of the bursting energy, making the air feel distorted. The blood left on the floor reflected a blurry circle of light under this light, like the shadow of the sacred, reminding their fetishes and determination. Grimm stepped forward, holding the battle axe made by the dwarf in his hand, and the sound of the axe blade scratching the ground suddenly opened, like a metal rustic. The goddess of war dance stretched out her hands, and she stepped lightly on the ground, calling out the remaining war dance rays. The buzzing bird of divine power spread like a shaped wave, surrounding Salia to form a defensive ambushes. Their movements were inextricably sympathetic. Grimm's shoulders were tight, his muscles open when the axe was lifted, and the goddess of war turned around in a flowing posture, and each step seemed to be crafting an invisible net. This tragic loyalty flashed in their eyes. Grimm's eyebrows were locked and the blind eyes of the war goddess flashed slightly, as if she captured an invisible scene. Salia raised his arm, and the power of the curse eye stormed like a tide. A purple energy beam shot out from his eyes, striking the cracks in the 9 realms. The strong high-frequency vibration sound teared the air, and the huge wave of the collapse of the God Realm ruins rose like a roar. The storm was raging at the battlefield, and the cold cries rolled up the sand and rubbed into a harsh sound. Allies were pushed open by this energy wave, and Grimm's body swayed slightly. He gritted his teeth and kept his feet steady. The goddess' fingers trembled slightly in the light. She turned around and grabbed Grimm's arm, and the two of them faced the torrent together. Their breathing became rapid, and their heartbeat accelerated in their chest, like a hidden rhythm, intersecting with the surrounding confusion. The energy hit orgasm and Salia's body began to collapse. In his body, the divine blood boiled and roared, like the deep and low roar of the ancient god. The underground light burst into a whirlpool, swallowing the battlefield without a fight, bringing a burning wave of shock. Grimm reached out and tried to grab Salia's shoulder. His palm caught a shadow in the air, and the sound of the metal hitting sounded. The goddess of war dance cried out and her voice resounded like a resounding sound, "No!" The picture turned into a messy flash, the smell of blood and soil became more intense, as if it was about to soak every inch of air. At this moment, the power of the ancient god accidentally touched. A golden torrent emerged from the cracks, accompanied by the rustling sound of thunder and the shaking rustling sound of the leaves of the world. Salia's figure was surrounded by light, and the conflict in his heart was resolved at this moment, transforming into pure and righteous light. Allies were lifted by this force, and Grimm felt a warm rest rising from the bottom of his feet, and the long robe of the goddess of war danced in the wind, as if responding to a new life. The war began to reorganize, and the chaotic voices turned into harmonious buzz, and the harsh omen of birds cried far away, like a whisper of hope. Salia opened her mouth, and her voice penetrated the energy vortex. "I had longed to be a part of the body, but now I choose to achieve justice. This curse I will become the key to reinstate order, even if it means my end." His words were as firm as a whisper, with every word lingering in the wind. Grimm slammed and strode forward. "No, Salia, we are your allies, not abandons. Let us face this fate together. I swear to protect this new world with dwarfs." His voice was rough and powerful, and the sound of the war axe hitting the ground strongly adjusted the weight of promise. The war dancer said, "Your sins will be magazined in my words forever. Although I am blind, I see your light. Let us break this rebirth. My heart is to hold your shoulders with you and overturn your prophecies." Her words swept over like a slight wind, accompanied by the sound of the chains. She stretched out her hand, her fingertips almost touching the corner of Salia's clothes, and the action was full of indescribable slightest thoughts. Salia looked at them, her eyes flashing softly. "Friends, this is my destined path. The power of the ancient god will turn everything. Remember, I am not a chess piece, but a change to create the glory of the future." His figure gradually blurred in the light, and the sound of energy dissipating was as light as it was. Grimm's eyes were wet, and he held the tight battle axe, unable to stop it. The goddess of war dance knelt down, her body trembled slightly, and her blind eyes reflected a golden rest. As the waves of the war passed, Salia's body gradually dissipated, accompanied by a low crack sound of cracks. Grimm and the goddess of war stood up, their eyes locked on the cracks of the revived world. Far away, the green mind of the new Nine Realms begins to appear, a glimmer of light, like the challenges of the future are quietly curling. The voice was weak, and there was only a silence left, reminding the end of this journey and the beginning of the new chapter. Salia's body gradually blurred in the light, like a slight wind blowing through the deserted battlefield, turning his form into scattered particles. Grimm and the goddess of war dance stood there, their eyes locked at the edge of the Nine Realms cracks. The crack was in a stable state, and the new greenness poked out from the stone mask like a fine silk. In the air, the biting coldness of the frozen breath could not be left, but was gradually sparse by a fresh earthy breath, like the awakened murmur of the earth, in the silence. Grimm knelt down, and his hands tightly grasped the object left by Salia, a rune sword. The sword is engraved with ancient symbols, and it is slightly flashed under the faint light. He raised his head, and a sadness swept across his face, and the muscles in the corners of his eyes twitched involuntarily. Far away, the roar of the cracks revived, like a giant beast awakening from its sleep, shaking the air around it, allowing the soil to dance lightly in the wind. Grimm's fingers turned white, and he hugged the sword tightly, and the metal ice sensation fell into his palm, reminding him of his once vows and his lost companion. The goddess of war dance walked towards the edge of the crack. Her steps were steady, like an invisible whirlwind slid over the stone. Her blind eyes moved slightly, and she lifted the leaves of the world in her hand, and the leaves swayed in the glimmer of light, emitting a faint green light. The green surroundings began to spread, and a young shoot of silk was diamond from the skeletons of the war, accompanied by the rustling sound of the branches growing, like a humble invitation, inviting newborns. Her fingers touched the leaf, and there was a sense of unspeakable determination in her movements. The fresh earth breath spread around her, as if the earth was responding to her call. The scene of the war gradually changed, and the waves of energy impact were like receding tides, leaving behind a peaceful rest. The dead bones began to be covered by green vines, and the withered stones and bloody ground were gradually rolled up by soft vines. Grimm stood up and slapped the dust off his body. The action was rough and powerful, accompanied by the low horn sounds coming from the wind, like a far-flung call sternly around his ears. He picked up the rune sword and walked calmly towards the goddess of war. The slight buzzing sound of the sword blade rubbed against the air into the surroundings. They stood opposite each other, and Grimm handed over the rune sword to the goddess of war dance. The sword was shining with light in her hands, and her fingers slid across the sword, feeling the traces under the runes. The environment changes from silence to a glimmer of hope, spreading far away to the world, and the whispers of the leaves of the world are swaying, like an unfinished melody that continues in the wind. Grimm's voice broke the silence. "Salia, we were imprisoned by curses, but your feud allows me to see the true meaning of the truth. I will protect this new world and no longer let the chaos repeat itself." His words were rough, with a trembling, like a snail knocking on my heart. The goddess of war dance pointed at her head, and her voice swept over like a slight wind. "The rebirth of fate will eventually be broken. Your eyes have foreseen the end of the world. Now they will become our guide. I will use dance to revive the order of the gods and face the challenges of the future." She turned to the cracks, rolled up swords and branches, and the movement flowed like dance steps, and the blind eyes reflected a golden residual. Grimm's eyes were fixed, and he stretched out his hand and patted her on the shoulder. "We can't stop, the blood of Salia flows in this thing. This is our weapon against the new threat, letting us write this chapter of rebirth together." Beside her, the waves of the power of the ancient god began to storm, and a high-pitched energy sounded like the interaction between thunder and storm, resounding on the battlefield. The soul particles of Salia melted into the cracks, and the light burst out like a golden torrent that swallowed nothing. Allies were circling by light, and Grimm felt a warmth rise from the bottom of his feet. His breath became deeper, and the long robe of the goddess of war danced lightly in the wind, accompanied by the rustling sound of the branches. She murmured, "Yes, the old god is gone, the new god is about to rise, but I feel the shadows far away. We must be ready for the inheritance of Salia and the hope for the future." The light gradually faded, and on the battlefield, the new green spirit quickly expanded, covering the dead body like a tide. The fresh earth breath and the low resonance of the energy buzzing intersected into a harmonious melody. Grimm and the goddess of war dance pointed each other, and they took the first step and left the battlefield. The heavy echo of the footsteps echoed in the wind, the sound like a low voice, symbolizing that they will carry the inheritance of Salia. On the horizon far away, their figures gradually blurred, leaving behind a glimmer of hope in the silence of the war. The lens slowly pulls away, the cracks in the 9 realms gradually merge, and the new green spirit spreads like a wave. Grimm and the goddess of war dance disappeared far away, leaving only a vast landscape. Around the crack, a slim dark shadow began to squirm, like a potential wild beast waiting for a while. The chill of the frozen breath was still lingering in the air, contrasting with the green organisms, suggesting the germination of a new threat, and a future challenge was quietly curled.